Okay, let's continue to focus source point to source point, intending to be one with each other. And for the second half hour, while we're continuing with our energetic connection and focusing as much as possible, I want to be talking about the documentary The Horse Boy. In our energy circle in a month, I'll be talking about the documentary Buck. Because these two documentaries are really very good ways to look at what is a shaman. What is being defined as shamanism in contemporary world, for contemporary shamans, that is, I think is really some ways off the mark. And by looking at these two documentaries, I think we're going into more like a deeper understanding, at least for me, of traditional shamanism, even though this could be done with a contemporary person. So The Horse Boy is a documentary that came out about 2008. I guess it was filmed a year to 2 years before that. And the general overall perspective of the documentary is this is a boy in Texas who is diagnosed as being autistic. And his mother is a psychologist. His father is a writer and has worked with the Bushmen in Africa. And the story unfolds about how they attempt to deal, first of all, about what autism is, about the boy and his situation, and also how they are attempting to facilitate living with that situation. Now, the father was very experienced with horses in his younger in his life, and one day, well, first of all, let me give you the names of the people. The son is called Rowan, the father is called Rupert, and the mother's name is Kristen. Now, I'm going to refer to them as their roles because, one, I forget names, get the names mixed up. Two, the relationship is important as much as the situation, the shaman and shamanic context they're in. So, anyway, the son is diagnosed as autistic, and one day he sort of gets away from his father and goes over to the neighbor's yard or farm or ranch and goes up to this horse named Betsy, and the horse is not spooked at all. And in fact, the father, who's very familiar with horses, realizes that the horse is being very, very compatible with the child. And he ends up putting the child on the horse's back at some point, and the child begins to talk in clear English at 4 years old. And so the father began to realize that there's something going on here, the relationship between this child and this animal, and this particular animal, a horse. And given the father's background and intuition, etc., he comes up with this idea to take his child to a shamanic culture that is deeply into horses. Theoretically, Mongolia was one of the first places, or perhaps the first place, to really begin to relate to the horse. Maybe, I think it said 6,000 years ago in one of the places I was reading. And so they decided to take this journey all the way to Mongolia in search of finding a way to help deal with the situation with the child, and to help the child to be better. And there are three scenes in this documentary that are very important. Those are the three scenes I want to talk about that help us to understand some perspectives around shaman and shamanism, as well as autism. The first scene in Mongolia that's important is there's a tour been arranged for them by some people there in Mongolia, and they first have go up to a mountain where 9 shamans, traditional. Now, first of all, in Mongolia, one of the traditionally recognized religions in Mongolia is shamanism. So it's a culture that really embraces shamanic traditions, at least within their culture, how they see shamanism. And so this first gathering is of 9 different shamans, people that they call shamans. And it turns out to be very profound. The child, Rowan, begins to act differently at some point. But when I'm reading the energies of what's going on, it was the change in the father. And the shamans are related to the whole family, not just to the child. And they're doing things with the mother and the father. And there is a rather cathartic process that the mother and the father end up going through. And you can see at one point in the documentary, after they've been through some of this intensity with the shamans doing things to them, where they hug each other, and it just feels so different. My reading of the energy is that the shamans, whatever they did to impact the child, was not directly with the child, but particularly with the father. His energies really changed in that ceremony, that healing, I'll call it a healing ceremony. And then the child began to relate differently. Now, we step back and, first of all, the father is telling the story. And he's an excellent writer. You also can read about the book, The Horse Boy is also in book form as well as film documentary form. It's also in an article in Sacred Hoop, which is a UK shamanism journal. And the father goes through this change. Oh, the point I was going to make, yes, that here there's the family. They have a young family. It has this child, and at a certain point, the child is doing all sorts of temper tantrums and not seeming to respond. And they take this to the experts in the Western medicine and psychology, and he's diagnosed as autistic. And then it becomes a very, very heavy experience. And the parents are very much invested in the well-being of their child, very lovingly. They spend lots of time with him, and you see in the documentary. So the documentary is really a story about our humanity. It's a very powerful documentary. I can't recommend it too much. And so I'm sure this becomes a very, very heavy burden for the parents, as you can see. And in this first ceremony with the 9 shamans in Mongolia, the release of whatever's going on with the father then seems to impact how the child relates to what's going on. The child becomes more playful, more laughter, and so this has helped me become to understand that what we define as a condition in our society or a disorder in our society may not only be, the only factor is what is happening with the person as being, quote, diagnosed, unquote, but within the social context. Because the father shifts, the son shifts. So that's what takes place in that very first, my reading of the energy, that's the main thing that takes place, is the change in the father, and that results in the change in the son. Now, the second thing they decide to do is to go to this lake, because some of the Mongolians say there that the waters there are very healing. And the child goes to this, they take this journey, partly on horseback, partly in minivans or vans, and they end up at this lake, which is quite beautiful. And they're playing in the water and so forth. But what I get there is this is the second most important, a second thing that happens, and it's mainly for the child. Now, I need to step back and look at how I define shaman. A shaman is someone who can function through other dimensions of existence to impact this incarnated dimension. And in my framework, I understand that there are that I've come to understand, that I don't really get from anyone else, but over the last 20 years, I've come up with a conceptual framework on my own, where I understand that we can look at existence from 20 different dimensions. Quickly, a way to look at dimensions is, think of a pyramid, and you think of the pyramid sliced into 20 sections, horizontal slices, and that everything exists in the first dimension, which is at the top, exists in all 20 dimensions below. There are some things that exist in the second dimension, but not in the first, but if it's in the second dimension, it exists in everything below it. The third dimension, fourth dimension, down to the 20th dimension. Most people on this planet, most humans, are functioning only in the incarnated dimension, which is the first dimension. I use the word dimension different than some other people, so you have to understand it from this particular context. Dimensions of existence. This is what we're functioning in. For me to call someone a shaman, they need to be functioning through the first 4 dimensions. The first 2 dimensions I consider form, and different types of beings exist in these 2 dimensions. The third dimension I consider, or I call, wisdom, which is sort of like the parameters of what can exist and what can be. The fourth dimension I call energy. This is where primarily energy, all energy comes from this fourth dimension. For a person to be really a functioning shaman, the way that I think of shaman, they have to be literally functioning in these first 4 dimensions. And the way they do this is they have developed certain energetic structures that I refer to as the shamanic infrastructure. That these different other structures allow a person to literally function through other dimensions. One way of thinking about the different 20 dimensions is different frequencies. The first dimension at the top of the pyramid is a slower frequency. This is where we have hard matter. The 20th dimension has the highest or fastest frequencies. And a shaman, by my definition, has to be able to function through these first 4 dimensions. So function at these 4 frequencies. And the 9 people that were called shamans there, 8 of those people fit my definition of a shaman. One person did not. That person may have been quite psychic, but a psychic is able to perceive, generally, to make a distinction here. For me, a shaman is able to do. You need to have information through perception of some kind, but then what a shaman can do is energetically. Those shamans were able to merge their energies with these 3 people, Rowan, Rupert, Kristen, the son, the father, and the mother, in ways that facilitate those energies of those 3 people to shift, to change, to become transformed. One of them was a psychic, which may have been providing good information, but only 8 of them, as far as I could tell, were actually being able to merge energetically. What I realized from this film was that the son, the autistic child, is functioning through the first 4 dimensions. As a child at 4 years old, he is already functioning through the first 4 dimensions. That is extremely unusual for any human being. There are not very many people that can function through the first 4 dimensions from my reading of the energies. The difference between the child and the shamans is the child has developed abilities to function for the first 4 dimensions, but he's not developed enough of the shamanic infrastructure to be able to function fully in those dimensions. So as I began to look at this over time and talk about this was only about 8 months ago, this past summer, during the summer solstice, I began to look at this documentary. Since then, as I've talked about this, people have said, well, what about this type of person or this type of person? So I began to find that in the human condition, the variety of human existence, that there are different categories of people that are functioning through the first 4 dimensions, like a shaman, but not able to function fully. And one of the things that autistic this child is, he is able to perceive. He's perceiving extensively. But my thought is that he's unable to process this in a way so that he's able to function socially the way that most people function socially. So he's sort of in his own world, his own autistic world. And he may choose not to come out at times, to interact. Because you would ask, a lot of shots in the documentary about, they asked the little child, Rowan, what is your name? And he just continued with his toys, playing with his toys, totally disregarding people asking him to interact, to verbalize back. He gets put on the horse's back, and suddenly he is talking in sentences and interacting with his father. So they go to Mongolia, and they meet up with these shamans. And so I begin to see, here is a child who is functioning through the first four dimensions, but is not developed enough to function fully like the shamans. And that's an important distinction. I'll come back to that. The child now goes to this, along with the parents and their Mongolian guides, they go to this lake. Well, I don't know if the lake has any particular water, any particular unusual qualities, but here's what I did get. That the energy of that land around the lake is what we would call a power spot. This is when the child Rowan began to shift. You can perceive, but what makes a shaman is he or she has developed the ability to intend to have effects, to intend to do, to intend to process. The child begins to develop some more abilities to do more intending. Now, you don't see like a whole lot is happening for the child there when at the lake, but my reading is he started to develop more of his shamanic infrastructure because he was in a power spot. If you think of the earth as a being, not like a plant or an animal or as a human being, but as a being, and it has energetic structures in some ways similar to us as humans. Not the same physical form, but it had a planetary being, in this case the earth, has what I call a physical body, a light body, a spirit body, and a soul body. That's my language. The earth being has those as well. And the power spots are where these energies of the physical body, light body, spirit body, and the soul body are sort of like coming out of the earth surface. There's the energetic of the earth thing. Realize that too. The earth being has energetic energies that are sort of like coming out. Like one of the things that the shamans were doing is they're able to facilitate transformation because they're sending out currents of energy from the navel area to interact, to merge with the family, the child, Rowan, the father, Rupert, and the mother, Kristen. The earth being is doing something similar at its power spots, what we call power spots. So the child being in a power spot begins to develop. And I was very surprised to read. The nice thing about the documentary, I have a pre and I have a post. So I'm able to see before and after. But then the third event is the most important event. They'd heard about this master shaman who is in a nomadic group with the reindeer people. And they herd reindeer. So they have no idea if they're going to be able to catch up with this nomadic group. But they keep heading farther north, close to the Russian border in Mongolia. And they do meet up with this shaman, and he does agree to see them. And this shaman, his name is Ghost, that's spelled Ghoste. And he's with the reindeer people. He's in his 70s and was not in good health, they explain on the documentary. But he agrees to see the boy. And there's a ceremony in the evening in the teepee, like structure. And then the next day, he comes to see the boy again. So it's for goodbye. But there's a lot happening in both of these. The formal ceremony and afterwards, when there's not a formal ceremony, they're just sort of sitting there and eating the cookies and being friendly, and sort of the little boy sitting in the shaman's lap. And what I read is that this is where so much happens for the child. Following that experience with this other shaman, the child is able to, he starts having pooping on his own. That's been a major problem, as indicated in the documentary, for the child. So he just poops in his pants and his underwear all the time. So the parents are always having to clean up the bowel movement. Shortly after leaving this, I call him master shaman, the child takes a bowel movement on his own. 2, his temper tantrums. I don't know if they were entirely eliminated or greatly reduced, but there's a major, major, major shift. I mean, literally, like overnight. And thirdly, he starts to play with other children, like children. At one point, the mother says that Rowan, the son, he's off playing with his Mongolian children. And like children prefer to play with children. They don't prefer to play with adults. They prefer other children. So he's off running around and playing with them, even though they don't speak the same language. He's playing with his other children. I mean, there is a very obvious just behavioral difference even taking place in the film in this short time. Now, so I look back and, well, what is going on with this particular shaman? I'm sure there's some accumulation with the other shamans and the power spot at that lake, but it's very obvious. I mean, just major transformation in this child's behavior. In just a few, overnight, so to speak. The shaman there, Ghost, in the Mongolian tribe of the reindeer people, he is a shaman functioning through all 20 dimensions. The first group of shamans are functioning through the first 4 dimensions. The difference is that the shaman in the reindeer people is functioning through all 20 dimensions. And there's a shift. Shamans, from this experience, I began to look at this. Shamans that are functioning through the first 4 dimensions are literally sort of like functioning with structure. What I call there's some part of energetic of the shaman literally extends across space and distance to merge energetically with the person in the ceremony or the people in the ceremony. And it's that interaction of the subtle energies, although they're not so subtle at that point, that really makes the change. I mean, it's sort of like the tools of the trade, the saw and the hammer, are with these different ways of merging energetically. The difference is by the time a shaman gets to the functioning in the all 20 dimensions, it's because they developed other abilities. And they're no longer so much working with structural interaction. They are working at the level of vibration, of frequency and intensity. Frequency and intensity. The frequency and intensity, is sort of, if you want to facilitate transformation in something, first you have to match it with the frequency and intensity. And then from there, you are able to, that is more likely to result in this major transformation. The shamanic infrastructure is made up of 20 different structures. And they develop them sequentially. The 19th is about to vibrate with intensity and frequency, and the 20th is about to know. So it's a way of knowing, receiving, perceiving information. And what the difference is this reindeer shaman, functioning through all 20 dimensions, is able to access more information and able to function with the vibrations that are facilitating the transformation. Now, this is a very quick overview. There's a lot more to go into about this, but it really helped me to understand shamanism. And Ghost, the reindeer shaman, became, for me, my missing link, because I already had the theory of what could happen, but I was not able to find anyone who was doing this. You know, in this class that we've gone through, I teach about radiating, expanding, extending, and resonating, ways of merging energetically. But I also start teaching in the very beginning to intend this from the source point, which is this little energetic structure that can be developed about 2 inches, about 2 or 3 finger widths beneath the navel, and then inside the midline. When that becomes developed sufficiently, and we're able to do intending this way, we're able to facilitate things happening in ways that we cannot unless that's developed. And I wasn't finding traditional shamans functioning through the first 4 dimensions who had developed this source point and were functioning with it. And I thought, well, you know, I must be really off. I must be really off. There's something that I'm teaching that really is not shamanic or is not developed enough or something. But when I began to read the energy of Ghost, the 70-year-old reindeer shaman who's functioning in all 20 dimensions, it's like it all came home. This shaman is functioning with his, what I call the source point, or interdimensional intent catalyst. He's intending, and the only way you can merge all 4 ways at once, that I talked about, radiate, expand, extend, and resonate, the only way you can function with all 4 ways at once is when you're intending with the source point. The shamans at the first gathering, they were merging only 1 way at a time, usually with what I would call the light body fibers or the light body currents. And some were functioning with what I call the soul body resonating. But no one of those shamans were functioning all 4 ways at once. When you're able to function with the source point, you're able to function with all 4 ways at once, and that will facilitate much more extensive transformation. And especially when you can start functioning at the vibration level rather than the structural level, so the point is, what I was teaching at the very beginning of the course was finally, I found someone who was doing that, and he was a very advanced shaman. And so I felt sort of I can't think of the word, that what I was teaching from the very beginning was very, very highly developed, but I didn't realize it. And so one of the reasons that so many people, well, I'm surprised the number of people functioning through the 4th and the 20th dimensions have been through this course. And I think one of the main reasons is because we've been focusing on source point, intending to radiate, expand, extend, and resonate. And that was the very first primary thing that I teach in this course. And what do we do when we get together in energy circles? We focus on source point to source point, merging energetically with each other. So we keep reinforcing that, So what I began to see was that my theory was the more dimensions a person can function through when you're doing your intending, the more impact. And so here was a documentary that I saw only 6-7 months ago, confirming what I'd been teaching or understanding for about 4 years. And I'd had some understanding of this before, but when I'd been teaching it. So it was really a profound breakthrough for me. And there's a lot more going on in this documentary, but I just highly recommend that you watch it. And next month, when we go into looking at Buck, here's a good old Montana cowboy who is a horse whisperer. But he is a shaman by my definition. And his form is not working with people so much directly, but working with horses and people in relationship to their horses. So we're going more deeply into this next month. So continue focusing source point to source point here. But does anyone have any reflections or comments or questions about what I said or what you saw, for those of you who saw the documentary.
I do agree with you. In the movie, in the documentary, the last scene where the boy is sitting in the shaman's lap, and the shaman had his hand running, in the air over the boy's body. I mean, you can feel that there's something going on there. That's at least how I was able to perceive that.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. Now, I think it's important to realize, as far as my observation and my understanding, what the shaman was doing with his hand moving sort of about 4 or 5 inches exterior to the boy's back, moving down the shaman was moving his fingers, that looks like what is happening. But what is really happening is the unseen. That's really where the power of what's going on is. I mean, still the drum in the first night, the hands over the body, these are all important factors. But the real power, the real impact is coming from what is not seen, the way that shaman can resonate vibrate his energies like the child's energies. So I think it's important to realize it's not what the shaman does externally that is the real powerful thing. The ceremonies, I mean, the drum is so important, but it's not the real essence of what is happening. Because a lot of contemporary people who are into shamanism really look at the drum as being such a very powerful shamanic tool. The people that I see doing a lot of drumming, most of them are functioning through only the first dimension. Many of them have not developed their own abilities to facilitate the transformation. And that's very important. One of the things that I really am observing about, at least here in the United States, people doing a lot of drumming, that it's a good place to start, but it's not drumming is not going to take one in and of itself to be able to do what this shaman did in Mongolia. Drumming can only take you a little bit of the way. So that's just a point I wanted to make on there.
It's interesting that the other shamans did so much more on the outside. It sort of backs up what you're saying, I suppose, with the spitting and the waving things around and the sticks and things. Yeah.
Yes.
The abuse.
Yeah. And what they did was important. Now I want to back up here. When oh gosh, we don't have enough time. I want to say so much. 2 points if I can remember them. One is that my observation is when a person develops a shamanic infrastructure, that they reincarnate. The physical body dies, but that structure remains. And so when they reincarnate, they come in with that structure, but that structure is not functioning until it's developed. It has to be redeveloped in each incarnation. And if you grew up in a shamanic society and you're sitting in the kivas and for 2 weeks and you're doing the sacred pipe ceremony, you're doing the sweat lodges and the sun dances and all the other number of different types of ceremonies that traditional shamanic societies are doing, you're more likely to develop this. And also the elders have perceived that a person has developed things, and so they put them into special trainings and special teachings with the clan uncles and the grandmothers, etc. One thing is the father probably was a shaman in a past life, because I want to read his structures. The father, this is very much a story about the development of the father as well, Rupert. He is now, when I read his energies now, just from tuning into him now, he's functioning through the first 4 dimensions. At the beginning of that documentary, he was functioning in only 1 dimension. So that his being in those ceremonies helped develop him extensively also. The second point I want to make is that as I begin to look at different people who are functioning through the first 4 dimensions, I've been finding some generalizations, and I'm not doing systematic research now, but it seems that a lot of people who are characterized or labeled as autistic, children who have Down syndrome, people who are classified as albino. Some of the people who are classified as ADD, attention deficit disorder, and some of the people who are classified as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A lot of people in those categories are functioning through the first 4 dimensions, but they haven't developed other parts of shamanic infrastructure to really take advantage of it. And so there's something, and so what I'm stepping back to talk here about, to say, is that what the Western scientists and the medical people were talking about in the documentary, that autism seems to have a real strong genetic factor in determining this, quote, disorder. And there's a lot of expectation, or a lot of thought, that there's a lot of environmental factors that will be discovered to be more and more relevant to this. But there's another factor that I think needs to be considered in, that the being that incarnates, this is going to be outside of Western science, the being that incarnates into a body and ends up being classified by us, and sometimes our lack of understanding, as autistic, as ADD, ADHD, Down syndrome, and albino, that they came in already functioning through having the structure, not functioning, but structure of the first the shamanic infrastructure that enabled them to function through the first 4 dimensions. So it's not something just happening to the chemistry or the genetics. There's an interactive factor going on here, and I think there's I'm just amazed that I'm seeing this more and more and more, I think it's a fact that needs to be considered. But until you can read energy, I don't know how people can begin to say this is going on. But I think there is that the being, the spirit that incarnates, brings with it certain development, and sometimes the physical body responds genetically to develop in certain ways. This is gross oversimplification. The other point I wanted to make was that there's a story that one contemporary shaman who takes his students down to Peru. He took them to a village where there were a lot of shamans, and they were doing healings. And the story that this the shamanic teacher talks about is that one of the students asks a question to the shamans. He's noticing that some of the shamans are doing lots of moving around, making lots of sounds and shaking the rattles and so forth to do their healings. And he's noticing some of the other shamans, usually the older shamans, are just sort of moving their hands a little bit, not doing a lot of external activity. And the person in the village there responds in saying that the younger shamans, the ones that are jumping around a lot, they're still learning how to be shamans. So the point you observed just now, a moment ago, after I started saying lots of things, is that it's not the external form. The external form is important. It can help. It can also help a person go into psychological feeling that this is a healing ceremony to get into a psychological space. But it's what the shaman, a person, is able to do, the unseen energies. That is what's my observation and my understanding, is that's what's making the difference. Not the external behavior, although the external behavior is important. So it is interesting how there was so much more activity, at least shown in the documentary, so much more dramatic activity shown in the documentary with the first group of 8 to 9 shamans. Okay, thank you so much for joining in. We'll be getting together in about 4 weeks again, and I will be sending out in the newsletter information about the documentary to try to watch, or at least watch the trailer. If you watch the trailer, that will give you a good idea. And the trailer is free, but it's called Buck, B-U-C-K, which is the guy's name. He's a contemporary living person. I don't think he defines himself as a shaman, He doesn't call himself that. He doesn't seem to have studied any traditional shamanism. But I want to tell you, he functions like a shaman. And it's also about horses. The part that I didn't talk about was that horses naturally function through the first and second dimensions. Humans function sort of naturally without additional training or development, naturally through the first dimension. Great redwood trees, they're functioning in the first and the fourth dimension. These huge trees on our planet. Something about them enables them to function through the first dimension as well as the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension being the energy, primordial energy dimension. Hawks and eagles through the first and third dimension. I think it was the first and fourth. I get it mixed up. But there are other types of species that are doing what we as humans can't do. And so we'll get to see more about the horses next time we go into that. So my friends, good to see you. And we'll be in contact, and thank you for joining in. And I send all of you hugs.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night, my friends.